Welcome to the Umbra Vortex, where whispers begin and screams never end. Beyond this point, only madness awaits. This isn't a place for comfort, only for truth. Not the kind found in books or muttered in confession, but a raw, unfiltered reality, cloaked in shadow, stitched with dread, and pulsing just beneath the skin of sanity. I'm Edward J. Hallow, and I'll be the last voice you hear before the silence consumes you. Tonight, you'll hear a tale of the sea, and the horrors that follow you across its endless expanse. A story where a man seeks rest in the most ordinary of places, only to find his peace shattered by something far more sinister. A birth, an unseen terror, and a presence that refuses to be ignored. This is the story of the Upper Berth, where the sea isn't the only thing that can drown you. I had crossed the Atlantic countless times, but this voyage aboard the Kamchatka felt wrong from the start. The sea was unnervingly calm, the sky cloaked in a heavy, oppressive grey, as if the world itself were holding its breath. It was a warm June morning, but the ship felt strangely cold, like the very air had been drained of life. When I arrived at my assigned cabin, 105, the steward handed me the key with an unsettling, nervous look in his eyes, as though he wanted to say something but couldn't. He muttered, "Try not to be disturbed," his voice trailing off like a warning unspoken. I chuckled it off. Sailors are superstitious after all. But as soon as I stepped inside, a cold shiver crept down my spine. The cabin was cramped and suffocating. The walls, dark and stained by time, seemed to close in around me. The air was damp, as though the sea had seeped inside, and the faint scent of rust and salt lingered. The upper berth was made up neatly, but something about the pillow was off. An indentation, as if someone had just been lying there. I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. I glanced around, noticing the porthole was wide open, hooked back. The room was damp, and the faint sound of the waves outside seemed muffled, as though the sea itself were hiding secrets. That night, I tried to settle in, but sleep wouldn't come. A soft, creaking noise from the upper berth broke the stillness. I glanced up and saw the shape of a man climb into the upper bunk. Tall, gaunt, pale. His movement was strange, almost unnatural. I tried to ignore him, but the air felt thick with something I couldn't place. The ship groaned, as if it too were uneasy. At exactly 2:17 a.m., I was jerked awake by a loud, disturbing noise. The upper berth creaked again, followed by the sound of something, or someone, scrambling out of bed. A soft thud echoed as the figure leapt down and bolted out of the room, leaving the door swinging behind him. I sat up, heart pounding, but eventually drifted back to sleep, hoping it had all been some strange dream. When I awoke again, it was still dark, but the air was colder now, as if the ship had chilled overnight. The porthole was wide open, and damp air flooded the cabin. I was confused. How could it have opened again? My mind raced, but I shrugged it off and dressed quickly, hoping to avoid my strange roommate and the oppressive atmosphere. On deck, I met the ship's young doctor. I told him about the unnervingly cold night and how the porthole had been open when I woke. His face paled visibly when I mentioned the cabin number. "Stateroom 105, he muttered under his breath. "There've been complaints about it. Strange things happen there." He hesitated, then lowered his voice, warning me to stay away from that room. He didn't elaborate, but the implication was chilling. He seemed visibly uncomfortable when I mentioned the odd man who had run out of the room in the night. The doctor glanced over his shoulder nervously and told me I should leave the cabin and take his larger quarters. He explained that passengers who stayed in 105 had recently gone overboard, vanished without a trace. He wouldn't say more, but the meaning was clear. I refused his offer, hoping I was just being paranoid. After breakfast, I returned to my cabin to fetch a book. The upper berth's curtains were still drawn, so I assumed my roommate was asleep. As I stepped out again, the steward approached with a grim expression. "The captain wishes to see you," he said, his voice tight. I followed him to the captain's cabin, where I was told that my roommate had disappeared. They feared he had gone overboard. The captain spoke of others who had stayed in that berth, how they had fled in the night, only to be seen going overboard by the watch. The steward confirmed that the room was empty that morning. The captain, voice thick with unease, asked me not to speak of it to anyone. He offered his own cabin for the rest of the voyage. I declined, determined to stay in 105 despite the strange events. That night, feeling a deep sense of dread, I retired late. The cabin was still. Too still. I opened the curtains to check the upper berth, only to find the porthole wide open again. Fury mixed with fear, and I stormed out to find the steward. He returned with me, pale and visibly trembling. "No one can keep that porthole closed," he whispered. After a heated exchange, I made him a wager. I'd pay him a sovereign if it stayed shut for the rest of the night. He reluctantly agreed. I tightened the porthole as much as I could, putting all my strength into it. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something terrible was about to happen. I lay in bed, every inch of me tense. The minutes dragged on. Then, again, at exactly 2:17 a.m., I heard the unmistakable sound of something moving in the upper berth. I turned to look. The room was thick with cold, damp air. A faint groan filled the silence. I leapt out of bed and threw open the curtains. To my horror, the berth was empty. But something was wrong. Something cold and clammy, like a man's arm, reached out from the shadows. I grabbed hold, pulling with all my strength, but whatever it was sprang to life, sending me sprawling. The room seemed to shift as I heard the unmistakable sound of wet, dragging footsteps. I chased the dark, shadowy figure down the hall, but it vanished around a corner, its eerie presence still lingering in the air. Terrified, I returned to the cabin. The porthole was open again. The air was suffocating, and the smell of stagnant seawater flooded my senses. I couldn't believe what was happening. Was it all a fevered dream? I checked the berth again. It was dry, empty. I closed the porthole once more, using a walking stick to jam it shut. I spent the rest of the night on the couch, watching it closely. This time it stayed shut. The next day, I found the doctor smoking on deck. I told him everything, but he simply shook his head. "It's not something you can explain," he said. "You should leave it alone." That evening, I spoke again to the captain. I repeated my story, hoping for clarity. He was silent for a long time, then agreed to investigate. Together with the ship's carpenter, we examined the cabin carefully. Nothing was out of place. There was no way anyone could have entered or exited unnoticed. But as the captain spoke of past incidents, passengers leaping overboard, the porthole opening during storms, the brass loop on the porthole began to turn, slowly, as if responding to an unseen hand. The air turned damp. The smell of seawater thickened. Then, without warning, the lantern went out. I leapt to check it, but before I could move, the captain shouted. He was struggling with the porthole, the brass loop turning easily in his grasp. I rushed over to help, but in that instant, the porthole burst open, and something emerged from the upper berth. A putrid, wet thing. A drowned man's corpse, eyes hollow and white. I wrestled with it, but it was too strong. It overpowered me, then leapt at the captain, knocking him to the floor. Before our eyes, the thing vanished, slipping back through the impossibly narrow porthole. We were stunned. The carpenter sealed the door. I spent the remainder of the voyage in the doctor's quarters. I left the ship in New York, but the terror followed me. I never sailed again. Some places at sea are older than land, older than memory, older than death. Some spirits refuse to drown. Some cabins never empty. He sought rest, but the sea offered no refuge. A room promised shelter, but delivered only silence, and something waiting behind it. Truth was glimpsed, sanity frayed, and the waves did not wash it clean. This was the Upper Berth, a reminder that some places are not haunted by the dead, but by what death could not claim. I'm Edward J. Hallow, and if you're still listening, not everything lost at sea stays gone.